Hello everyone and welcome to another presentation of by Affordable NZ Tax CPD. Today we're going to be looking at Penny and Hooper, so personal attribution. For those of you who have doctors, mostly doctors, specialists as clients, this will be interesting for you, especially if you've got an IRD audit that might be pending, or maybe you've done nothing and you haven't thought about it and you've just used the 80% rule that the IRD brought out in 2012 as sort of a rule of thumb. If you've been using that, you should be listening to this because that rule really doesn't apply to you. So let's move across to some slides here dealing with an IRD audit. What are we going to be looking at? First, we're going to be looking at, what happens. You receive this risk review or an audit letter. What do you do? Second thing, probably the first thing you've got to think about is whether you've got audit insurance for your fees. Now, there's some development in this. For a very long time, we've only had one audit insurer, new audit insurance come on the market. And I've got Clyden Manicum from FM Insurance who's joining us to talk about a new product. So I think you'd be interested in that. Then after that, I'm going to talk about Penny and Hooper, just the case. What's happened since the case? What has the IRD been doing with their revenue alerts? And then what are we seeing in practice? Then I'm going to go and say, well, look, you've gone through this audit now. What happens? You've got an agreement with the client, with the IRD. This is how much tax you're going to pay. How do you deal with that? How do you pay that? How do you make sure that you don't pay too much penalties and interest, or too much interest and no penalties? And for that, I've got Chris Cuniff, special treat from TMNZ, coming along explaining to us how tax pooling works, and in these kind of dispute situations, how that can help reduce the interest and take away the penalties. So a couple of interesting things to look forward to, a couple of guests coming on. But before we do so, let's get into what it means, how the Penny and Hooper situation came about and what's happened since that time. So let me draw a picture. As you all will know, that I enjoy drawing pictures and explaining things. So what happened with Penny and Hooper in their situation was you had two doctors, Drs. Penny and Dr. Hooper. And what they done, roughly their structure was like this. They had, trying to draw with an eraser. Just a minute. Let me get that in the right place. They had a trust. So triangles are trusts, for those of you who have not watched these before. And then they had a company underneath that. Squares are companies. So company. And they were kind of over here with their patients. I think you would say patients over there. Now, what they would do is they would work for the Ministry of Health. Over here, and the Ministry of Health would pay them a PAYE salary. The private, so that's what they call public work. You're working for the government essentially when you're doing that. And then this bit here is the private work. The private practices are a lot more profitable, and these two guys were orthopedic surgeons. So if you have, the patients were paying here, and then the service is being supplied over there to the patients. And in this situation, the services were being supplied. The services were being supplied to the Ministry of Health. So in those days, the personal tax rate was 39%, the trust rate was 33%, and the company rate, I think the company rate was 28%. But anyway, there was a divergence between the personal rate and the trust rate. So you don't need to be a rocket scientist now to know that, look, if you can keep some money down here or in the trust and prevent it from going into the person's own name, then you're going to be saving some tax. And that's what they did. They did pay themselves a bit of a salary. They said, look, if we're working for the DHB, we get paid a certain salary, and we're just going to pay ourselves a salary the same as that. And then they left some dollars back in here, and those dollars were dividended up into here. And so 33% tax was paid on that. And then they would draw that out and use that in their private purposes, buy a house or whatever. So I already didn't like the structure. There were lots of these kind of structures around at the time, and I already said, "Oh no, we don't like that. This looks like tax avoidance to us." So they took them to court. Penny and Hooper thought they had a good case, and they fought it. To their credit, they fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, they lost at the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court essentially said was, "Hey guys, we've looked at this before. We've looked at this many times before. If you're the one that works for the money, you're the one that should be paying the tax on it. You can't be divesting your income to someone else when you're the one working for the money." And a lot of people think that the court came up with this, use this concept of market salary to come to their conclusion, but they didn't actually. What the court came to the conclusion is they designed actually a new thing. They came up with a new thing that said, well, look, if you're working for the money, then you have to be paid the salary, and we're going to call that a commercial salary. No one knew what that meant. That didn't exist. It's not. Go and look at the definitions in the Income Tax Act. It doesn't exist. It's just something that's been created by the judges in that case to try and make a test to explain how this should be taxed. So they said, look, if you don't pay yourself a commercial salary, then that's tax avoidance. Now, for anyone who's been practicing in New Zealand for a while, you'll know that our tax avoidance rules are very wide. I mean, the view I take, and maybe I'm alone on this, but the view I take is that most things that you will do as a tax advisor will be tax avoidance. It's just, there's a technical argument on the black letter of the law that most things that you do is tax avoidance, because the black letter of the law says if you do anything to advance a credit or a deduction or delay income or avoid income from arising, then that's tax avoidance, unless the tax effect is merely incidental. Now, this merely incidental thing is very important. It's very important in the sense that it is in legislation, but it's not so important in the sense that, as you'll see, as we've gone through time, as I already then applied this ruling, this merely incidental, it almost never arises by the looks of it now. But anyway, so we had the case. The case came out, Supreme Court case, and the taxpayers lost the case. And the judge said, look, you've got to apply this commercial salary to yourself. Now, in the case of orthopedic surgeons, they're different from other surgeons. And often they don't have any other things that so what would sometimes happen with them is they would go and, for their private practice at least, there might be a private hospital where they arrive at. The patients arrive there at the same time. They do the operation. It's all organized for them. The patient gets billed by the private hospital for the nurse, for the anesthetist, for the surgery, and they bill them for their time. So it's not like they can say, well, look, I have bundled up lots of services. My service is a little bit of that, and there's a profit margin on equipment or whatever that's included in this. This is a problem for orthopedic surgeons. It's a problem for anesthetists. Anesthetists are the same. They don't really they just inject you with the drugs. It's not like a maxillofacial surgeon that has a big, basically a building that's been customized for them to operate out of. Other guys with ophthalmologists, they also have a lot of equipment. Urologists have, they've got robots and things that they operate with you on. So it's very expensive for urologists. Their equipment is very expensive. So after the Penny and Hooper case, it was like, well, okay, how are we going to apply this? How are we going to apply this case? And RD actually came through with a very pragmatic solution to it. They said, look, okay, well, guys, so there's lots of people affected by this. They did sort of an amnesty where they only went back 2 years and they fixed up most people's problems. And then they said, okay, well, going forward, we need a better test than a commercial salary, because what is a commercial salary? And no one knows. And so they said, okay, well, look, what we're going to do is we're going to say, if you flow out 80% of the income to yourself, then we're not going to treat that as avoidance. We're going to sort of say, well, maybe there's a bit of avoidance, but we'll think it falls in the merely incidental category. They didn't actually say that, but that kind of reading between the lines, that's what their thinking was. And if you flow out 80% of your income to you, we're not going to look at you because we've got bigger fish to fry. They didn't say we won't look at you. They just said we will, through the care and management procedures, we'll allocate our resources to bigger fish. So let's roll on forward a couple of revenue alerts later. 2021, that revenue alert that was issued after the Penny and Hooper case, IRD goes in and they change a little bit. They change what they say about this 80%. And they kind of make it that they're not bound by it and they're not going to really apply it. It's like, okay, well, 80% is okay, but it depends on a case-by-case basis, and we'll come and have a look at you. And in 2021, they kick off Opinion Hooper project, whereby they start looking at what I think is only the doctors. We'll get to this in a minute, but I've asked the IRD to tell me which industries they've looked at and what percentages they've applied to those industries. But I'll go through that later with you in a minute because that's quite interesting. But anyway, so the revenue alert has changed. IRD kicks off their audit procedure and they start auditing people. And what they do is they don't just audit people. They so normally what happens and what their custom has been, and there's no requirement that they should do this, but what their custom has been in the past is they kind of give people a chance to come clean if they think that there's an issue. So they'll issue a risk review, and if they issue a risk review, it gives you a chance to do a pre-audit notification. And if you do a pre-audit notification, then most of your penalties, unless it's egregious, in some cases, if it's super egregious, they can still put harsher penalties on you. But I've never seen that. I've only seen them try that once, and they backed off after we fought with them about it. But in most cases, if you do a pre-audit notification, all your penalties will be reduced to zero. They might impose them and reduce them to zero, or they might decide not to impose them because you did a pre-audit disclosure. So it's very deciding where you are in the audit. That's very important. And some people say they get confused, but I've never been confused by them. If you get a letter and it says this is a risk review, that's not an audit. Risk review can progress into an audit, and then they'll send you a letter saying we are now at the audit stage. So that's the point where you lose your 100% discounts. You can still get other discounts. I'm not going to go into the technical detail of those discounts, but if you're in this kind of space, you kind of probably need some specialist advice if you're a generalist BAS advisor, specifically to take care of those discounts. But if you've got Opinion Hooper audit, in my experience, IRD doesn't give you that chance. They just come and whack with an audit, and you're into the audit, and they say, no, what they do is they just send you a letter saying, look, we think you should pay 100% tax on 100% of your income. The 80% thing is out of the window. And then, it's fair enough. It's on the taxpayer to justify their position. The onus of proof is on the taxpayer, unless it's criminal proceedings. So the taxpayer has the onus of proof of saying, look, I used the 80% and this is the reason why I used it. Now, explaining to them why you use the 80% is not going to be that easy in situations. So I've had a recent audit. It's ongoing at the moment. And we use the 80% for that on the basis of the IRD's revenue alerts. And on the basis that we thought if we didn't, if we actually went through the whole thing and allocated out all the profits based on work and non-work, then we would have ended up roughly at 80%. So we didn't do that, but then as part of the audit, I've gone through and done that. And for these guys, what they have is there's a couple of them. They've got 3 guys that work for them. They have 2 specialists, and then they've got 3 other specialists that work for them. And they kind of take a cut of those 3 specialists. They've got a profit margin on those 3 specialists. The other thing they've got is they've got nurses that work for them, and they've got equipment. They've got heaps of equipment. They've got $1 million worth of equipment. So what I've gone and done is I've gone and looked at all of those profit drivers in their business. And I've said, look, if we start at 100%, this is what we'll come up with. But this profit driver here, I can allocate, and I've just allocated a 25% margin to those profit drivers. I think 25% is reasonable. They don't want to, do the new guys over, but by the same token, they need to cover their costs. And the same with equipment. If you want to replace equipment, you're investing in equipment. Kind of a good rule of thumb is you want it to pay for itself within 5 years, I think. So we've used 25%. I think that's a conservative profit margin. We'll see how we go with that. We're just at the beginning stages of the audit on that one. Now, let's just stop here, and I'm going to get my friend Clyden to come in to talk about your fees and how they're covered. So, as you guys know, your clients can take insurance out for your fees. So let's just go over, get Clyden into the room, and we'll talk to him about that. Okay, I've got Clyden with me, and so what we're doing is we're doing this Penny and Hooper case study. So you've got the letter from the IRD that says you're going to be audited because you don't get a chance to do a risk review usually. And now you're like, oh, what am I going to do now? How much is it going to cost? I'm going to, what am I going to tell the client? I'm going to cover that. And this is where Clyden comes in. Clyden, do you want to tell us a bit about what you do, who you are? I mean, look, I know that you're a great cricket player until you injured your knee, which I'm not going to bring. I said to myself, I shouldn't bring up how you injured your knee, but so I won't. But tell us a bit about yourself apart from your cricket career.
Great. And the operative word there is used to be. Used to be a great cricket player. So I ran until I
Okay.
became too old and injured myself, and it's a cool story. But look, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. And kudos to you for doing this. I think it's fantastic. Just a bit of background about me. So I have a tax and commercial background. I have a tax pooling background, and I was a team in Z for almost 8 years. And also used to work at the revenue and the prosecutions and investigations area. So um, I suppose my journey through, particularly in my time at TMNZ, I crossed paths with the tax audit insurance industry.
Okay.
Um, and I thought, wow, hugely relevant service, perhaps now more than ever, considering how IRD essentially what they're doing now. And I always thought that there's a better way that this service could be done, and yeah, that it could be a lot better than it actually is in New Zealand.
Great. Excellent. And so you've gone and you've set up this company that does things better. Now, look, a lot of people I talk to say to me, "Oh, I thought about that stuff," but then when I looked at how much hassle it would be, I just decided not to. So essentially, what you've gone is you've gone and started this company, you're taking the hassle out of the SME because in the SME space, it's not like the big space where you got hundreds and hundreds of dollars and thousands of dollars to spend on this stuff. You've just got to get it right for your client as quickly as possible. So what
That
have you tell us about that? What is this product and
Yeah, yeah. So look, this quite honestly dates back probably about 6 or 7 years when I first came across tax audit insurance. And as I said, I thought great service. Now, if I was an accounting firm, how do I administer and how do I actually get this into my practice? What I was met with was a wall of administration. It's significantly challenging, especially for a smaller to medium firm to, well, in the traditional way tax audit insurance has been done, to implement and to administer and the ongoing work that's involved. So, as I said, myself, my business partner, we thought about if we were to do this differently, how would we do it better? To us, the intuition we had is that there has to be a better way to do this, and so we essentially looked to other countries as to how is the service operated elsewhere. And when you're in New Zealand, you only need to look as far as Australia, which we went to. And what we found there were about 4 or 5 different providers off the bat in Australia. And the product over there has evolved quite significantly over the last 20 years, whereas in New Zealand, we've stayed fairly flatlined. So the way the service was administered about 20 years ago hasn't really changed as much as it has in Australia to be better. So when we discovered better options there, for us it became very clear these are useful, relevant, worthwhile solutions that we have to bring to New Zealand. To make life easier for the accounting firms that we worked so closely alongside for many years.
Hmm. Well, I mean, for me, that's the definition of a business is making someone else's life better. The money is the side effect, but I mean, hopefully there is money, otherwise you can't be doing it. And also, you're probably not making someone's life better if there's no money involved in it. So,
Yeah,
sure, you'll be making profits. I hope you make lots of profits because I think a competition in this space is well overdue. And also, getting to that pain point of sending out all these blasted letters to all your clients and them not taking it up and you're getting an audit and then they're not covered and you've done all this trouble. So, you said you've made it easier. How do you think? Can you just explain, just expand on that? How is it? Do I still have to go and send letters to all my clients and saying take this thing up or don't take it up, and explain that only the fees that are covered, not actually the tax that they didn't pay?
I suppose, Cyber, what might be worthwhile doing at this point is just taking a minor step backwards to some watching this may not be aware of what tax audit insurance is.
Yeah, good
Um,
point.
yeah, just a very brief scenario explanation, really. Tax audit insurance it picks up the cost of the professional fees associated with an audit or risk review or any inquiry on a filed return, really. So it protects against the financial loss that can result from that. And what you've touched on, Cybrand, is the for an accounting firm wanting to administer this prior to my business, FM Insure, being uh, in operation, you would have to have sent out emails to almost your entire client base. I think it might be over 90% or something like that.
Hmm.
And you'd have a third party hook into your systems, which essentially provides your client data to them. And from that, there's receipting that's typically done by the accounting firm. In a nutshell, the accounting firm becomes an insurance broker, right? That's
Mm.
essentially what they're doing. They become a reseller and they undertake the work that is ordinarily associated with that type of activity. So it was significantly challenging to do. Now, what we found when we looked to Australia is policies that take away almost all that admin. I make the claim we remove 95% of the admin. So we've launched Fee Cover in New Zealand. That's our product name. That's what we have
Hmm.
set up. And how Fee Cover works is we hang our hat on being easier, fairer, and more innovative, right? So if we touch on the easier bit, you've asked me how do we make it easier. You don't need to send out bulk emails to all your clients to have them covered. You don't have to receipt, follow up missed payments, follow up your clients for questions they may have or having to deal with confused clients as they come in. We have a policy that we administer to the accounting firm that simply covers every single client group that they look after. All right, so if you think about that, let that land. We have one policy that we distribute to the accounting practice, and
Hmm.
that gives them the benefit of tax audit insurance across their entire client group. It's as simple as that. You don't need to email everyone. It's a decision that's made at the practice level. If it's determined to be useful, which the timing currently suggests that it is, and the feedback we're getting certainly is. Um, so yeah, it's much simpler from that perspective.
So, kind of, if I think about it, as a car insurance, if I've got car insurance, I would go to the insurer, get myself insured, and then there's usually there'd be some sort of excess. I've actually just my insurance is just rolled over, so I kind of know all these things. But you know,
Okay, good.
adults adults know these sorts of things. So, but in your situation, there's no excess, isn't there?
No, there's no excess.
You're covered from the first dollar, and then also there's a top end limit. Usually for my car, it's like, okay, well, it's not going to be $1 million or whatever. Third party insurance is a different story, but for my car, it'll have a top limit. Is there a top limit for clients, and how's that set? Am I jumping forward into your fairer of the three bullet points that you said before?
Oh yeah, look, that's fine. Yeah, feel free to jump around. I think you are, which is perfectly fine. So in terms of limits, generally we start client groups at a $15,000 policy limit, so you can claim up to fifteen thousand
Okay.
dollars. But we're very customizable. We can and flexible. We can do what you like. We can go all the way up to $200,000 for specific client
Wow.
groups.
Okay.
I certainly recommend that once you go over, say, a $10 million turnover threshold, that you are looking at stepping up your cover, because as you all know, cyber and audits, as you get bigger, tend to become more complicated. There's more to do,
Mm.
thus incurring more costs. So we do encourage businesses to step their cover up. But
So
yeah,
will
it's
that 10,000, that's per audit or risk review that you get, and then it's the same thing. It covers you for a risk review or audits or any kind of interaction that your accountant has to do on your behalf with the IRD, I assume, and then that's per one of
yes.
those interactions.
Correct, and it's per so it's fees that the accounting practice may incur. It can also extend to fees of external consultants as well.
Okay.
So if something requires specialist help, then that can be covered as well. In the vein of making things easier, we've done things such as so. Typically, under more antiquated traditional tax audit insurance policies, if you've had a change in a client group or you've had a new client come on board, typically you'd have to offer that policy out
Mm.
and do some work in the background to get that client covered. It's fairly confusing because unless you have a bespoke policy written in your practice, you don't know whether it's happened, and you may find that it hasn't, and you may be dealing with clients you're not sure who's covered. With us, that all goes away. So because every client is covered, this also extends to new ones. So clients that come in organically, one by one, they're automatically covered. So a great perk to be able to say you offer, particularly in times like these when businesses are hearing about IRD's efforts in the space almost every second week in the media. I know I am. Cybrand, I'm not sure
Mm.
if you see that as well.
Oh, you talk to them best about every day. It feels like that, but maybe it's not true.
Yes. Yeah. So what we offer here in a nutshell is we give if you're an accounting practice and you have this policy in place, you're saying to all your clients, we're going to give you peace of mind that for every return that is filed, you benefit from our fee cover protection that covers you if anything happens. If I already come knocking, we've got you back.
Mm. And I guess I should just clarify, I'm not paying Clyden a commission and he's not paying me a commission. But I
What,
think
you're
I
not
should,
paying me for
yes, sorry, no. But I should be paying you a commission because if accountants are covered by you, then and they need me to come in and help with an audit, a difficult one or a sticky one that they can't deal with themselves, then yeah, my fees will be covered, but their fees will be covered as well. So can I just go back to so you've got those people and they you've got the firm and let's just say it's a 10 million firm, and they can identify those clients that they think might need a higher level of cover. Now, just like with my car insurance, every time they go and they say, well, we need a higher level of cover for these guys, then that will increase the premium that they've got to pay for that, I would assume. Correct?
that? Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
A big point with us, Cybrand, we'll talk about being easier, fairer. Fairer does actually touch on the cost perspective. Now, what I can tell you is that we've been successful. We've spent about the last year working on bringing these policies to New Zealand from Australia. And we've worked with large, big underwriters and large reinsurers and we've now been successful in driving the cost down on a per client group basis by between 80 to 90%.
Wow. Okay.
So it is significant. Many
Because
firms are, yeah,
yes.
quite blown away by how we've done that and what we've done. It's a combination of a couple things. The fact that we've operated in a monopoly type situation in New
Mm,
Zealand for,
yeah.
as I mentioned, the last 20 years. So monopolies, I suppose when you're a New Zealander, unfortunately, you become accustomed to being held under duress of a monopoly or a duopoly,
Hmm.
and those structures work really well for the people providing that service, right? Because especially if you have a really useful, relevant service, you can charge what you like, and
Mm,
what choice do you have but to comply? So we've brought the benefit of a simpler way to administer this policy, as well as non-monopoly pricing. So we've overnight driven the cost down
mm.
significantly and made it far easier for firms to administer as well. So very, very proud of that.
Yeah, no, well done. You're doing a great job. But that's just the market, and it's just capitalist market and practice. And this training website that I've started is also that kind of a thing. Let's just go and do something cheaper so that we can drive the prices down. Now, Klein, so can I just come back to this point? So, at the moment, if you go through one of the conventional audit insurance ones, what you do is you send out your letters, and your clients will pay or not pay. And if they pay, they're covered. If they don't pay, they're not covered. Whereas in your situation, your paradigm, it's actually the accounting firm that becomes the client, and they pay the fee for everyone, and then everyone is covered, and then they would have to then sort of put up their charge out rates to take that into account. But because it's so much less, it's actually not such a big thing. But so the timing of those premium payments, how does that work? So would the accounting practice have to pay with that premium up front, or would they? Is it spread over 12 months, or is it like how does that work?
Look, firms can do what they like, really. We have built-in flexibility with our options. So traditionally, if you prefer to pay in a, on your car insurance analogy,
Hmm.
sorry, Brendan, if we use that, if you pay in a lump sum for the whole year, you likely pay a little bit less than if you spread payments across monthly, and that's the same with us. You can pay an upfront annual premium, which covers everyone, or we can use premium funding, to spread payments across a 10 to 12-month period. It is a per annum policy. You might even consider other options. I'm from a tax pooling background, so I'm very familiar with tax financing being a very effective form of funding. I'm advising firms that if payment upfront in a single lump sum is a problem from a cash flow perspective, consider utilizing your provisional tax date, and utilizing your prov tax as a form of working capital is something I've
Mm.
talked about a lot in the past, and that's one of the lowest forms of funding you can access, in my view.
Mm. Okay, so can we just talk the sort of the where the rubber meets the road? Um, Say I've got this $10 million um, firm. Uh, what is the typical cost of your policy? Say they let's just assume they're sort of a typical mid-sized firm in the regions.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, the amount that we charge the way our charging model works is we look at your client group numbers in totality. So,
Hmm.
how many client groups do you look after? So, if you think about company, trust, mum, dad, that's a client group, right? So, you might look at them as one, or we look at them as one client.
Okay.
We're interested in what their turnover is. So what is their annual turnover amount? Where do they fit? Is it under a million? Is it 1 to 3, 3 to 6, over 6? We go all the way up to in stages up to $100 million of turnover,
Hmm.
and we're looking for a number. So how many clients fit that description? You might say in like a business entity client group that are up to a million, or 1 to 3, or whatever it might be, and then you give us a figure. Now, we in the background, what we do is we apply a pricing model to the number of clients that you have in each category, and we spit out essentially a pricing for that firm.
Okay.
Look, cost varies. Again, what I would suggest, or what I would give you as a guiding principle, is that on a per client group basis, the cost is reduced between 80 to 90%.
Mm.
We've had firms who have switched to us from the old way of doing this. And what they're telling us is that it's costing them less than half of what they paid to a traditional audit insurer. It's costing them less than half to cover up to 80% more of their businesses. So, on
Mm.
average, firms have a 20% take up rate on the older way of doing it. So, what we're saying here is we can go all the way up to 100%. And Cybran, on a model like that, what we're saying here is that to go from a 20% average coverage per firm to 100%, the risk doesn't exponentially increase. The way it works in our industry is we assume that the 20% that self-insure are probably the highest risk clients. Those are most at
Mm.
risk of getting an audit. So to go from 20% to 100% from the underwriter's perspective, the risk doesn't exponentially increase. In fact, it only incrementally increases. So by doing that, we make life easier for the accounting firm.
Mm.
We can keep costs down. Effectively, what we're saying is let's pool your clients' buying power together, and treat them as a almost like a single big client, so to speak. And when they do that together, they can drive a much better environment for everyone.
And is it possible, like under the current things, you have to offer it all to all your clients? Is it possible under your situation where you can say, look, I just want to cover it for a cohort of these clients, and here they are, and this is the characteristics, and write me a policy for them?
Yeah, if you want to do that, we actually offer. We have so Fee Cover is our product name. Fee Cover Edge is what I've been talking about so far, where we cover. We can cover extends to your entire client base, but we also have Fee Cover Individual, where a firm can pick and choose who they want to cover
Mm.
specifically.
Okay.
So the model of everyone being protected is essentially it's not an option if you only want to select it for a few. And then we get closer to a more traditional way of operating. But the differences with us is that it's more cost effective,
Mm.
and it's more customizable, and we don't have a minimum take up rate, so you can offer it to who you choose. Again, we take away all the administration from the firm. In this case, the client would then have that policy on an auto renewing type of cycle, and will be the one in charge of payment, etc. So it's much simpler
Mm.
for the firm using that model if they don't want to get everyone.
Yeah, so that's quite clever because I guess if you're going to go and pick and cherry pick the ones with the higher risk, well, they're going to have higher risk, and that's the reason why you've picked them. And so,
Absolutely.
but if you do everyone together, it's almost like the ones that are lower risk are subsidizing the ones that are higher risk. Um, if you
Yeah,
want to
I mean, you
think
can
about it
look at
that
it
way.
that way. But I think the really important message that we want to put out there, Cybran, is that your chances of a risk review or audit, or an inquiry on a filed return at IRD have significantly increased
Mm.
in the last, would you say 6 to 8 months? I'm not sure if that's, or maybe the last year, you might
I
say.
think probably the last 2 years when they started giving more money in the
Yeah,
budget, and then I heard someone
yeah,
say it's like 120 million now. That's over 4 years. I don't quote me on this figure. I can probably get it wrong, but it is a significant amount. If you kind of had to translate that into number of people, and then you just look
mm,
on the other side, has the accounting industry grown by that much? Is there $120,000 worth of fees that have been created on this side of the fence? I don't think so. But there's going to have to be that, or even more work to counter that 120 million that's being spent by the government. The 120 million they can spend is on AI and automated stuff, whereas we can't do that. Each one of our things is an individual response to, it's all individualized. We can't club all our clients together and say, oh, well, we're
yeah,
going to give you an AI response on all of these people, but they can do that to us. So probably it's
yeah.
more than the 120 million over the 4 years that we've got to ramp up.
Yeah, and really, before when you made that comment about the lower risk subsidizing the higher risk, I don't look at it that way at all. What I'm looking at here is that we get to, as an accounting practice, and keep in mind, we designed this product with accounting firms and first and foremost in
Mm.
mind. We're looking at making their lives easier. That's always been a focus for me, even at my time in the tax pooling industry. Um, we What we're saying here is that an accounting practice can now offer their clients peace of mind when they go to sleep at night. For each and every piece of media they consume that tell you that IRD are getting a lot more active in this space, for that business to know that by being connected to this firm, or their advisor of choice, that if this were to happen to them, they're covered. That's peace of mind that is, to me, worth its weight in gold. Right? It's
Mm.
just everything is better knowing that.
Well, I think sort of one step back from that is to make sure you select a good accountant that does your stuff correctly. But
Yeah.
even if you've got the best accountant, things are changing so quickly and so often that I'm just seeing people struggling to keep up with the complexity of it. So even if you've got the best accountant, there's areas that they're going to miss out on, and it's nice to have this cover. Okay, sorry, I don't want to sound like I'm doing your job for you.
No, no,
Um,
that's
Look, just what kind of feedback are you getting from people that you've sold it to?
hugely positive. Unsurprisingly, it's been overwhelmingly positive. I think the best way for me to convey this, which was really touching for me, personally, when I discover something brilliant, my natural instinct is to share this with the world, right? I want to let people know that I've discovered something amazing. The very first client that we signed up, as soon as he did, he emailed 10 other business firms to talk
Mm.
about the fact that he's discovered this amazing solution. And for me to see that, it was almost an emotional moment. I mean, Cybran, I'm not an emotional guy, but that was, touching, because for the first time I got to feel like, wow, I'm on the other side of delivering something that someone has felt so strongly about that they felt almost compelled to let people know. And so the feedback's been positive. What we've heard is that we've done the things we've promised. We've made it easier. We've taken away all the admin. There's usually someone at the firm who's an administrator can't thank us enough because we've made life so much easier. Their firms are more productive. They now can focus on things like what they're actually got into business to do, as opposed to being an insurance reseller. That's a problem that should not be understated. As if you're using an old traditional way of covering yourself in this industry, you essentially are stepping into a broker type capacity, and you are a reseller. We've taken all that pain away. So to answer your question, it's been really great
Okay,
feedback.
awesome. Okay, well, I'll put your contact details in the training. I'll make it available to people, and you are around New Zealand, so if people wanted you to come out to them and present to their groups, they organize a few accountants together, or some of those networking groups that people are having, that you can come out and talk to them, or if they wanted to come out specifically for a quote for their firm, then you're open for business. So, and then also, if you've got some sort of corporate paraphernalia with explaining this sort of stuff and like PDFs. So I'll take those PDFs and I'll put that up with this training. So if people wanted to go and read that a little bit further,
Great,
it
thank you.
ticks and crosses how it compares with conventional audit insurance. Okay, Claude, I'm going to call it there. But great to see you again, and thanks a lot for the presentation. It was very interesting.
Great, thank you, Cybran. Thanks very much for having me.
Great, thank you very much, Clyden. That was awesome, and it's nice to know that there's another option in the marketplace that takes away the hassle of dealing with clients and getting to the outcome. Okay, so now what I want to talk to you about is the results of my Official Information Act request that I put in. So, going through these audits, and the thing that sort of I'm thinking about going through these audits, and I don't like the general anti-avoidance rule, because I think if the government wants to make a rule that says you should pay tax, they should make it darn clear, because it's our money that they're taking off us. I think the way they think about it is that all the money is theirs, and you're allowed to keep some of it. So I think about it as it's all the money is mine, and I pay some taxes for the roads, the hospitals, and so on, and I'm happy to pay that tax. And if they tell me how much I should pay, I'm happy to pay that as well. The problem I have with a general anti-avoidance rule is that you go and you apply the rules and you think, oh, this is how much tax I've got to pay. But no, an IRD official can come over the top, say, no, I don't think you've got to pay that. I think you've got to pay more. And there's quite subjective. There's no way that they can point to something. And like commercial salary, what is that? It's very subjective. And the allocation of these profits, it's very subjective. And then you end up with some sort of horse trading position with the IRD about how much tax you've got to pay. And that's just not right. What they've got to do is they've got to tell us how much tax we've got to pay, and especially with the doctors. They don't care. And most of the doctors, they don't care. They don't care about how much tax they've got to pay. They just care about the patients that they see. And so they just want to know, they just want to have certainty. So, the guys I talk to and say, oh, well, you've got a Penny and Hooper audit. What they say to me is, oh, well, I'll just pay the money. I'm like, no, we're not going to roll over that easily, because the IRD is actually not acting very ethically in this situation, in my opinion. So, but anyway, so that's why I looked at it and I'm like, okay, well, if they just tell us how much tax we've got to pay, why don't they just go and say, look, if you're a doctor in a general practice and you've got, and it's just you, then you've got to pay 80%. If it's two of you, you've got to pay 70%. If you're a neurologist, you've got to pay 75%, and so on and so forth. Just tell us the amount that we've got to pay and we'll pay it. Now, it's probably not that easy, but why don't they just make a safe harbor for us that we can follow? And I don't mind if the safe harbor is on the high side, because the alternative is going through the Penny and Hooper analysis every time, every year. So every year you've got to go and say, okay, well, now we've got these two doctors, one of these guys that work for them, that works for them, has left, and now there's only two people, so the profit margin changes. Maybe there were three nurses. Maybe they got some new equipment. All of these sorts of things. It's actually quite a difficult process to go through the whole business and work out what the actual taxes you've got to pay. So even if that safe harbor is high, sure, you pay a little bit more tax, but who cares? Either you would have paid that tax or you would have paid the fees to me. If you pay the fees to me, well, it goes to me. That's great. I'm happy with that. But it's not good for the country. It's not good tax policy. Let's just set some rates that are maybe on the higher side, and we all accept it, and we carry on, and we don't have to do this process anymore. Okay, so now time for this this letter that I wanted to show you from that I got through the Official Information Act. Let me just toggle to it, and then I'll show it to you. And here it is. So basically, wrote them a letter saying, can you essentially tell me how many audits you've undertaken, who they were on, what percentage you got from them. So okay, so this is the answers they've given me. They've referred back to their most recent revenue alert. And I'll put this this letter in the training so that you can read it at your own leisure. And then they say, well, look, okay, well, we'll have a look at these questions in more detail. There's 40 cases going on at the moment. They've completed 80 audits, of which they identified 17 million of extra income that was inappropriately diverted. But that's resulted in $1 million of tax to pay. So, that's not that much. For 80 people and $1 million, I saw with the Bitcoin work that they've just started, they had, I think, 120 people and something like 10 million worth of income. So this is quite a low amount in question. And the other thing you've got to remember is that this is spread over 3 years. So they've gone, it's only when the top tax rate went up to 39 again that this became an issue. So they're kind of just auditing from that time onwards. So it's only 3 years that they're looking at. So if you divide that million by 3 and by 80 audits, you actually come out with quite a small amount per person per year, which to me is like, okay, well, why are you guys even looking at this? You're getting between $3,000 and $6,000 per year per audit. Isn't that just merely incidental? I mean, who really organizes their affairs to try and get to save that much? Not these doctors. Most of them don't. They don't. I mean, I've got some guys that come into me and I say, well, how much do you earn? They've got no idea how much they earn. They just don't care. But they do care when they're treated unfairly. They do care because if they're treated unfairly, they can move to Australia very easily. They can move to Australia. They can take advantage of the temporary residence rules and not get taxed on the passive foreign sourced income. And also they earn higher salaries there. So, I think this is a real own goal for the government, going hard on these guys. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm happy with the IRD coming and auditing. I'm not good with what was happening under COVID. We have to have audits, otherwise people don't apply with the law. I guess what I'm saying is just not these guys. Go for some other guys. Which people might not like me saying, because then that might mean that they will branch out to accountants and lawyers and engineers, which is the next target space. And actually, that's what the Commissioner of Inland Revenue has said a couple of tax conferences ago. He said, look, I'm going to go after those guys. Anyway, let's look at this next thing. They've imposed shortfall penalties. So IRD is really aggressive now. They're a lot more happy to impose shortfall penalties on people who have taken, who they get with tax avoidance in tax avoidance situations. So that means to me that 17 of the guys didn't make I guess maybe they gave the other guys in that 80, maybe they gave them a chance with a risk review and they made a pre-audit disclosure. But these 17 guys, they didn't get a chance and they got whacked with penalties. So, penalties, it's a real thing. It's not like it's a theoretical thing anymore. The IRD will come after you for penalties, and you won't be able to stop them. Okay, so what about my last question? My last question was, can you give me the percentages so that I can just have a percentage that I can apply, so that I don't have to every year go through and do all this calculation? Because, with all due respect to people who do calculations, that's not the most interesting work for me. So, but they've said no, they're not going to give me that. They can't tell me because they think I'll be able to identify people if I knew that. So I'm not very happy with that. I think they should have told me who, at least they could have said we audited so many doctors, so many lawyers, so many accountants, so many engineers. But they're not telling me that. So what I've done is I've appealed to the Ombudsman, and I'm going to ask the Ombudsman to review this. And I'm sure the Ombudsman will agree with me that if you've audited 80 people, you can say whether they're doctors, accountants, or lawyers, and I won't be able to know which ones they are. It's just impossible. So I think they won't have a leg to stand on. So once I get that information, I'll do a volume 2 of this, and then we can go through that together as well. Let me just see where we're at with our slides. So we've talked about you receiving the risk review and the audit letter, what to do. We've talked about the audit insurance and who do what do you do with that, and it's actually a very useful thing. Then we've explained Penny and Hooper situation, how to respond and how to calculate the whatever percentage there is that you need to. We've had the update on the audit activity. And so now you've gone through this audit situation with the IRD, and you get to the point where you agree, and I think most of the doctors just agree the position. They're not going to fight it. They don't want their names. Penny and Hooper, for everyone, all the doctors know the Penny and Hooper name. They know those guys personally as well, a lot of them. They don't want their names in lights like that. That would be too embarrassing for them. So most of them, I'd say 90% of them, if not 100% of them, do not want to go through that same process again. So what they will do is they will capitulate. So you can fight a little bit, but eventually they will capitulate. If you haven't got a good argument, they'll say to the IRD, okay, well, we're up for it. And then, I mean, they do have the money, generally speaking, to pay for that. So they'll cover that, and then IRD will then do reassessments for you for those periods. Now, there's a couple of options here. If you've got the money like the doctors do, the best option is to go and buy the tax through a tax pooling agency. And I've got Chris Cuniff from TMNZ who's going to join me now and explain to us, say we've got these 3 assessments for the past 3 years. What's the best way of going through and getting the cheapest money essentially to pay for that, and how much that will cost? So let's let Chris into the room and talk to him about that. Great. And so, as I said, we've gone through the Penny and Hooper audit now. We've talked to Clyden about what happens, how you can get your fees covered. And we've got to the point where we're at the end, where the IRD have said, look, this is what we're gonna assess you, so you know you're gonna have tax to pay. And so in the tax payment side of things, there's many different ways that you can do this. And I've got my friend Chris Cuniff, who's joining us today and going to talk us through that from TMNZ. Chris, over to you. Just a short introduction, and maybe let's get straight into it.
Thanks, Ibrand, and hello, everyone. Yes, some of you may know me. I used to be, as previously, the chief executive at TMNZ. I stepped down from that role a couple of years ago, and I now do a lot of training, a lot of technical work with the company, just working part-time. And one of my favourite areas to get into is actually tax disputes. I find them really interesting, and it's an area where tax pooling can deliver a lot of value. So I'm delighted to be able to have this conversation today.
Okay, it's unusual for people to say that. Usually when I'm doing tax disputes, when I go home, I have disputes with my wife as well, which doesn't go down so well. But I sort of get into the habit of disputing. Well, let's go over to some slides that you've prepared today. So if you just talk to it, and I will move the slides on as you go, Chris.
Yeah, so I thought what I'd do is just start with a quick overview on tax pooling. So most of you will be familiar with pooling. It's been around for 20 years or 20 plus years now. But for those who either aren't aware of it or are newish and don't remember the start, the system was set up by Inland Revenue in 2003 to take the heat out of use of money interest exposure and the sense of unfairness when Inland Revenue charges what is deliberately a high interest rate in order to encourage people to pay their tax on time. So TMNZ was the original tax pool. We started on the 1st of April 2003. So we view ourselves as the pioneers of tax pooling. And pooling over the years has evolved. Look, it's absolutely mainstream now. It's used by all the major accounting firms, but it is not solely the domain of the big end of town and the major firms. All accountants or tax agents can use it. And whereas we started back in 2003, looking largely at the big end of town, our key clients these days are SMEs, medium-sized businesses, high net worth individuals. So this is um, an instrument or a part of the tax system that should be accessible to all.
What, Chris? Can I ask you why is that? Why is it sort of? I mean, in the olden days, Air New Zealand might have a very unpredictable tax
Yeah.
position, so it might pay more tax than what it, or it might have an audit going on and it thinks, oh well, I'm going to pay more tax than I need, and so you would expect them they pay a lot of tax. Is it because in the SME there's a lot more people, but they might not individually pay as much tax, but overall they do pay a lot of tax?
So right at the beginning, the large corporates were the ones who were having the biggest problems. When I was head of tax at Air New Zealand, uh, in between provisional tax payments, I think my tax position moved in the realms of hundreds of millions of dollars,
Yeah.
as there was incredible volatility in both the aviation sector, but also in commodity prices and in exchange rates. And so someone like Air New Zealand or any of the large corporates which had to pay their tax without any of the benefit of the uplift rules that we now have, they were very quick to adopt. But what happened is the rest of the market realised there's a benefit in it for them, and it has spread throughout the market. And now you end up with the value of thousands of SMEs can be just as good as the value of a handful of very large enterprises using pooling.
And have you found that the SMEs have actually picked this up, or do you think there's still like a massive market share that's just sitting out there where people are like, oh, we can't be bothered doing this tax pooling thing; it's too difficult
So
for us.
I think there's relatively high recognition by tax agents of the value of tax pooling. One of the challenges is the conversion and trying to get um, clients, firstly, to believe that it's legal. It's not too good to be true, and it is. By the time an agent is talking to someone about firstly provisional tax and then about pooling, and the meter's running,
Mm.
and if the client is saying, "Oh, it sounds really hard, I don't know," that is a barrier to conversion. I mean, it's something we're working on all the time. Is ways to remove the inefficiency and the barriers to small businesses signing up. But our biggest growth area is absolutely small businesses
Yeah.
using pooling.
Okay, so there might be still. I mean, what this training is aimed at, this is actually an SME training. So
Yep.
it is SME accountants. So kind of the message is for them. So I mean, often what the SME people will do is they won't be able to deal with a tax audit themselves. They'll get someone like me to help them. But sometimes they can deal with it themselves. And so let's just use this case study. So I've kind of taken you off where you were going, but maybe let's go back to your slides and see if there was anything. Was there anything else you wanted to cover on this overview slide?
No, if you just move to the next slide, when it comes to using pooling for reassessments, uh, there's four key benefits, and one of them is it allows you to actually manage the process, and so the timing at which you decide you're going to make payment, if any, and the cash flow you can determine that based on your client's needs. Using pooling gives you extra time to settle the audit. We eliminate any late payment penalties that Inland Revenue might charge, and of course we significantly reduce the interest costs. So if you're sitting on a reassessment, there is no reason at all that you would not use pooling.
And this is
So
the other
looking at the
thing.
next slide.
Oh, yeah, this is the other thing I was going to ask you is in Penny and Hooper situations, I went through the OIA earlier in the presentation that I did. So they are actually imposing shortfall penalties. But can I use tax pooling to buy the shortfall penalty? If I pay the tax back when it was due, does that mean that there's no shortfall penalties because all my
No.
tax was kind of there's still shortfall penalties?
Yeah, so shortfall penalties are a penalty in their own right. They're due at the time the assessment is issued. Pooling cannot eliminate shortfall penalties. If, for whatever reason, Inland Revenue applied late payment penalties, it does eliminate those because you are buying backdated tax and you're treated as having paid tax on time. And if you just bring the next slide up, Cybran, just in terms of reassessments and the areas that we can apply or use pooling. So it can be used for any tax type. It's often a misconception that it's only available for income tax, but if a client is reassessed on any tax type other than the social taxes, so the student loans working for families. That it doesn't work in that space, but on income tax, GST, RWT, in fact, AL has just been added into that list.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
what it allows you to do is, if there is an increased amount of tax, so you filed a return, Inland Revenue has reassessed, you can buy the increased amount of tax. If you hadn't paid the original amount of tax, then you can't use pooling to retrospectively buy that. And there are occasions where, in fact, you haven't filed a return, and that might be, if you take the example of FBT, if a business was unaware that was an FBT liability that arose on, the payment or the granting of a benefit, and an agent comes in and says, "I'm sorry, I've got some bad news. You're going to have to file some FBT returns," and you do a voluntary disclosure. Inland Revenue has a discretion to say, yes, you can use pooling, because we realise that you missed paying the FBT, you weren't aware that there was a liability. The other thing to be aware of, and this is one of the drop-dead deadlines that exist in the Tax Act, you have 60 days from the day that the revenue reassesses. So you look at the date of the reassessment notice, add 60 days, we must have transferred the tax to Inland Revenue by that time. If it arrives on the 61st day, it is of no value. Inland Revenue will not accept the transfer. But 60 days is better than the 30 days that you typically get to pay tax once a reassessment is issued. And of course, reassessments aren't a surprise. There's generally a whole process that you go through before the reassessment is issued. So one of the key things I want to work through in this case study is you don't need to wait till the end of the process to contact us. You can use us proactively to manage your tax risk throughout an audit.
Okay. I was going to ask something and I've forgotten, but so that 30 days, all that means is if you haven't paid it by the 30 days, interest will start running. After they finish the audit work and then they issue the assessment, you've got 30 days and then the interest starts running. But you can still pay it. You just have to pay interest on it after that.
Look, if you had to enter into a settlement arrangement with IRD because you simply didn't have any, sufficient money, then that becomes, you become part of the debt book. In our case, you've got 60 days to make full payment. Otherwise, pooling is not effective. It's not allowed.
Okay. Excellent.
So what I thought I'd do was run a case study based on what you've been talking about, Cyber, and of course the nature of Penny and Hooper reassessments is that typically this is a flip from a company or a trust into the individual. So what we're talking about is the differential on the tax rate between either the trust rate or the company rate. And so I've created an example here where a client may have been reassessed across 22, 23, and 24, and there's an additional 25,000 payable in each year. And I've done a little quote there as to what IRD's use of money interest would be, and I'm assuming in this case that all the tax was due at P3 because the taxpayer had used uplift for their P1 and P2 instalment, so interest is only going to run from P3 and there's no late payment penalties. And so on the 15th of December, if we calculate it at that date, on a $75,000 liability, core tax liability, Inland Revenue is going to will have charged you $20,018 of use of money interest. And of course, for every day it's not paid, the interest accrues at 9.89%, which is another $150 a week or $620 a month. So it continues to grow. If you use the tax pool to purchase the tax at 7th of May 22, 23 and 24, the interest cost would be reduced in the vicinity, I'd say probably 25 to 30%. So instead of paying $20,000, you're probably going to be paying sort of $14,000 to $15,000. So it's a significant saving, and certainly worth having. So if we move to the next slide, the scenario you're going to have is Inland Revenue is going to approach you or your client and say, look, we're interested in your tax affairs. We think you fall into this category of Penny and Hooper. And at that stage, as an agent, you can probably make an assessment yourself as to what the risk is here. Is your client dead in the water? Or do you think there's a really arguable reason why the income that's been attributed to the individual is appropriate and the balance should be left in the trust or the company? So you've really got three strategies. You can just wait until the end of the process, till IRD issues assessments, and then you've got 60 days to contact a pool, buy the tax and transfer it. Or you can buy some of the tax at an earlier opportunity and then wait for the final outcome. Or you can make what we call a stop the clock deposit and just drop some money into the pool for the purpose, as it says, of stopping the clock, stopping that interest running, and then you go and fight the substantive issue with the revenue, knowing that the interest clock is not running. So I'll run through each of those scenarios and the pros and cons of them. You can see option one was just wait to the end, okay? And so you're going to buy $75,000 of tax at those dates in 22, 23, and 24. The benefit here is you know exactly how much tax you owe. So you've haggled the deal with Inland Revenue, you've got the reassessment, you're buying exactly what is required, no more, no less. The risk or the downside is, could you have turned the interest clock off earlier? So notwithstanding that you're not going to be paying IRD interest at 9.89%, you are going to be paying TMNZ interest at 6 to 7%, and you may have been able to stop that earlier if you'd had a better view or decided that you wanted to act and take a proactive approach. But it's very valid to wait until the end. One of the things you need to be certain, of course, is that your client does have the money and that writing a check out for $70,000 plus interest is going to be feasible. Often, we should acknowledge in Penny and Hooper type cases, the individuals we're talking about are not exactly short of cash. So, they will generally be able to meet the bill.
What I see, Chris, is mostly if they've got a Penny and Hooper situation, it's either arguable or it's not. If it's not, I think if you've got no arguments with the IRD about Penny Hooper, I would say to people, go and do a voluntary disclosure right away, and then use TMNZ to pay that tax. Yep. If it's arguable, what I see people doing is wait until the end, because kind of the way that they think about it is, well, either I kind of borrow the money from TMNZ at 6 or 7%, or I borrow it from my bank at 6 or 7%. And pay it across. So that's the equation that plays into it, how much they can get the money elsewhere from.
Look, that's absolutely right. What's your opportunity cost for funds that you may be investing, or what is your cost of funds if you are going to borrow and it's going on the mortgage or on the business's overdraft? So that's a judgment that the advisors will use. And I guess part of if we move to the second scenario, this would be one where you might think, I do think that we are going to have to pay some tax. As an agent, you might try and beat IRD down a little bit from whatever their starting point might be. But you say, look, I think you advise your client that they are going to have to open their wallet and pay some tax. So you could come to us and say, look, I'm going to need tax at these 3 dates. I'll buy it now. Of course, that turns off the debt. You've made the point, Cybrand, about cost of funds or opportunity cost. The risk is that you might buy a little bit too much. I mean, what I would say is if you bought too much, it means that you've been highly successful in arguing the revenue down. So you should get a refund of what you overpaid and go to the pub and celebrate. but having bought the tax, we can sell it for you at a later date. The other piece is if working capital or cash is tight for the client, tying up cash at an earlier stage rather than a later stage may be something that you want to focus on, and that's again a judgment that the agent could make.
Yeah. So no, sorry, I was going to ask a question, but now I've forgotten what I was going to ask. Anyway, I'll let you carry on with my question. Will come
Okay.
to me.
So option C is very close to the buying the tax. Option C simply says, okay, I acknowledge we're going to have to pay something. I want to have a scrap with IRD about this though, because I think they're pushing this far too hard, or they've got the wrong end of the stick. But you put some money into the pool today, and that turns off the interest clock. So you stop accruing IRD's interest rate at 9.89. You have you can now have the debate knowing that it's going to cost you no more at all from this time on. And look, you'd have a better view, Cybran, as to how long the discussions around Petty and Hooper go on. But I can tell you that we have had clients in other cases where there's been tax disputes, and these have gone on for years. I think my longest was 12 years.
12 years.
They made a deposit in April 2012, and we settled that in 2024. And I was able to give them a report and just say, this is how much money the client has saved by the proactive approach that they took back in 2012.
And you went to the pub and had a massive, massive blowout.
Well, actually, that was the only tax pooling was the only bit of good news they had that day because they lost the case.
Sorry, I've remembered my question. So, with the second option, purchase tax at earliest opportunity, you would still backdate that purchase, or would you?
Yeah, that's right. So this is one where we backdate it. We're buying the tax that we expect to be payable. If it turns out that you bought, a few thousand more than you needed, we'll sell that tax for you. So you're going to earn some interest on it.
And with this one, the stop the clock deposit, would you did deposit that into the pool?
You just put that into the pool today, and then at a later stage when you say, right, I now know that I need X dollars on each of the dates, we use that balance that you've got in the pool to buy the earlier dates.
And with refunds, so say you've got some money that comes back to you, there was some issues, some angst with AML, with getting refunds out from people. Has that now mostly been taken care of? Is it?
Look, we still need to do it if we're refunding more than $10,000, but it is so much easier than it was.
It used to be. Okay.
There's so many digital processes now for doing AML. The only problem is if you end up with a client who is one of these people who just
don't want to
philosophically doesn't want to engage with it. But the reality is you can hardly deal with any professional these days without without AML rearing its head.
Yeah.
So I think most of the objections that we're finding are falling away. People are used to it. And look, on the final slide, it's really as an advisor, you're potentially going to have a few objections, and this just helps you with how you might get around this, because we know that advisors are aware of pooling. Clients have been taught, not to believe that, if something's too good to be true, I shouldn't trust it. Pooling is the exception to that rule. They say if no revenue department ever gave up anything in the way did anything good for taxpayers, so why would somebody create tax pooling? The background I put in the original, one of the earlier slides, sort of just credentializes tax pooling as set up by Inland Revenue that's been around for more than 20 years. One of the things about pooling is, particularly if there is tax to be paid, it is a way for an advisor to deliver good news to a client at the same time as they're getting bad news. So the bad news is, look, you do need to pay some tax. The good news is I've saved you a significant amount of money on the interest that is owing. So there's an upside there. Philosophically, and we're dealing with individuals here in Penny and Hoover cases, and they feel a bit like they've been shafted by the revenue in many cases.
Well,
Well,
they have
here,
been. Yeah.
one small win is
Yeah.
that if you use pooling, you're not paying a cent of interest to the revenue. So that's, you're kind of taking that away from the revenue. For some individuals, it's a mindset that they enjoy. And the flip side of that is, by using TMNZ, you're working with a company. Yes, we make a profit on the deal, but 100% of our profits are committed to charity. We have our founders have set up a foundation, the Whakatapu Aotearoa Foundation, and the profits that TMNZ make are committed to that charity, which distributes it for environmental and community causes in New Zealand. So, if somebody's going to get, if you're going to pay some interest to somebody, you may as well give it to an organisation that's actually going to do good for the country.
Yeah, and I think that will resonate with the doctors because, they don't really care. A lot of them, I've got sort of three responses, maybe just two, but the first type says, I don't want to deal with the IRD, just pay it, Cybrand. And I'm like, no, we're going to get a better deal for you than that.
Yeah.
The other type says, okay, well then I'm moving to Australia, stuff this, I can earn more money there and pay less tax. The third type says, okay, well I'm just going to retire and I'll just, if they want to do that to me, I'll just retire and then someone else can look after these patients, or these people can just go without and die on the
Yep.
waiting list. Essentially, this is kind of how they feel, the thank you that they're getting after all the many years of hard work. So it's kind of those three responses, but I think, as you say, this kind of softens the blow. So maybe sometimes some good things come out of bad things, but not very often.
Yeah, and again, for an agent who maybe not so much in a Penny and Hooper case, but as other clients get audited, and we know that in many cases the clients think that everything is the agent's fault, whether or not that's true. The sense of being able to deliver some benefit to the client is it's a good news story for the agent, and we're happy to help them to look good.
Yeah, and I think if you're an agent, what I've done when the Penny and Hooper thing came out 2 years ago, I went to all my clients and said, hey guys, there's a Penny and Hooper thing that's come live again. Your ticket will be up at some point, so just be warned. So when we then did get the audit, it wasn't such a shock, but still, I got those, two different responses from two different people on those audits. Chris, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time and for contributing to this, and I'm sure the people listening would have taken some benefit from it, especially in this very important space.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, and lovely to have a chance to talk to you and your clients.
Okay.
See you.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Chris. That was really good information to know. So just to summarize there again, if you don't want to pay the IRD penalties and interest, go to TMNZ, got the online calculator, get a quote for your client, and get that tax squared away. And you've got that 60-day period from when the assessment is issued to buy the TMNZ tax. If you don't do that, then you're into the IRD penalties and use of money interest situation. So just something that I didn't make so clear before that I think I should just make clear is that, in these kind of situations, there's two types of penalties that can apply. One is the late payment penalties and the other one is shortfall penalties. So late payment penalties, that will usually just go on automatically because now you've got an assessment that's come up and you haven't paid the tax. And then the shortfall penalties, well, that's that pre-disclosure notification. If you make that, then you can get 100% discount. If you make a post-audit disclosure, you get 40% discounts and so on. So that's a different thing to the late payment penalties. The shortfall penalties is different to the late payment penalties. Okay, well, I think that is it. Let's just go to our slides and just make sure that we've got everything covered. We've gone through all those things. We've talked to TMNZ, and now we've paid the tax. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of how to deal with an IRD audit. IRD has a lot more money at their disposal. I think from memory, it's around 60 million. So if you think about 60 million, how many people you could employ if you set up an accounting firm now just to fight the IRD? Have you done that? Probably not. So there is a backlog of audit work that needs to be done. So we're going to catch up with that now very quickly. And I can't see that any let up in that. The issue for a right-wing government and our current central right government is that they can't raise the taxes. That is just a cut against their own constituents. So they've got to squeeze more blood out of the stone as much as they possibly can without raising the taxes. So that's their playbook. That's what they're going to do. I think it's the right thing to do. The reason why we've got hospitals and roads and schools, etc., is because people pay their taxes. That's the difference between us and third world countries where people don't pay their taxes and there's no, they don't have those amenities. So that's the right thing to do. They should audit it. If they don't audit, then people just don't comply with the law. It's very bad for my job. It's great for my job if they audit. But by the same token, if they do audit you, make sure that you get the best results for your client, and don't just kind of roll over. And hopefully this presentation's helped you, give you sort of a roadmap to go through, should you get one of those risk reviews or audits come at you. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.